Brandon Bailey, coming back at you again with another album ranking video. I know it's been a few months since I've done one of these. Kind of had a lot of stuff going on in my life that needed to take care of, particularly surrounding the ranking thing. The next band I'm going to rank, as you know by the title, Metallica, is a band that was pretty important in the relationship between me and my grandmother, who just passed away a few months ago. I think I said this in another video, that the Black Album and Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz were literally the first two CDs I ever owned because of her giving them to me. So doing this was kind of hard to put together, especially because I was doing it as she was like in the hospital and stuff, so it's kind of tough. Took me a lot to muster up getting back into this, because of course I had to pick Metallica as my next band, but here we are, and I finished it, and it also had a little bit to do with 72 Seasons, their new album, like kind of wanting to have more time to live with it too, like not really judge it like right off the bat in a ranking video. But I am hopping on the bandwagoning train. Everybody's doing their Metallica rankings now, right? Because they got a new album out. That's just how it is. And they're a band that's super duper important to me. Like I just said, my grandmother gave me the Black Album as one of my first CDs. She told me like that I should be scared of both the songs Crazy Train and Enter Sandman. Like she told me they were about the boogeyman. I should be scared of them or something. I don't know. I probably was as a kid, because I was a pretty impressionable, gullible, dumb kid. But anyway, yeah, like Metallica's one of the first bands I ever knew about. Not that like as a kid I understood their the context of them, or why they were such an important band, or even what heavy metal was in the first place. As far as I knew, that was just like hard rock music, you know, like I knew what rock music was, but that was like the stuff that I was really getting drawn to. Ironically, because at the time, like I was growing up with, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s, like radio and MTV and stuff, with new metal and alternative rock and like more genres of hip-hop coming into form, and, you know, electronic music and stuff, just all kinds of stuff that was coming up around then. And I was kind of figuring out that I liked older music. I don't know, even then, even though I like all that music still now, because it's like older now that I'm talking about it. But anyway, you probably get what I mean. So yeah, Metallica's always had an impact. I remember like I'd kind of lost like interest in them like when I started getting into different kinds of music, and I think I was like in middle school and watching like AMVs, if people remember anime music videos. I don't know if people still make those. But there was one, it was like Naruto, and it was like Master of Puppets, and I remember that was the first time I had really like listened to like Master of Puppets like that, like, and the way that the AMV was constructed, it like kind of like spoke to the progression of the song. Like I remember it having that sort of impact, and like me realizing how grand like the structure of it was, and you know, that kind of brought me into Metallica, because I was starting to learn how to play guitar around this same time too. So I was like, wow, that's nuts, you know. And then obviously, Guitar Hero came out. I don't really remember if I've made this spiel in other videos of how I got into playing guitar, but basically I got into playing guitar because of Guitar Hero, and learned about a lot of classic music and a lot of guitar-based music that guitarists should probably know because of that game. And you know, obviously there's some Metallica songs on there and stuff, and then eventually they had Guitar Hero Metallica, and that like kind of got me even more obsessed with them, just doing that, like, which I was already becoming obsessed with them. That's kind of skipped over a little bit, because when I got into playing guitar, got into like the history of heavy metal and all that stuff, and obviously you can't tell that story without talking about Metallica at some point. And the genre I was most drawn to was thrash metal, of course, so like, you know, just being influenced by the big four of thrash, you know, was a given. And yeah, just unspeakable, really, the volumes of influence that they have on my life. Maybe I don't listen to that kind of stuff so much anymore. I don't really play that kind of stuff as much anymore, but it'll always be there with me, and I'll still enjoy it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Just because I don't listen to metal all the time, like, I can still come back. And I know for some metal purists, Metallica is like metal light. Like, a lot of people don't consider them like real heavy music, but they got some pretty visceral stuff, and we're going to get into that in a second here. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I mean, I have a lot of background with them. I've seen Metallica once. I saw them at Yankee Stadium with the Big Four concert. It was a great time back in 2011, thanks to my friend Thomas Hardy, rest in peace. Yeah, him and his parents kind of hooked me up with getting into that one. But, I'm glad I've gotten to see Metallica before. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. They're amazing. Like, the pyro, everything going on stage. They have such charisma. Like, I literally watched James break his low E string playing All Nightmare Long, like the really fast part, and like just keep going. Like, he just didn't mess up, like didn't break a sweat or nothing about the whole thing. And like, it just completely fucked the song up. But like, like, he was still in it, still delivering the vocals. It was cool. It was a good time. I recommend seeing Metallica live. Anyway, without further ado, we'll get into this ranking. I think that's enough spiel there. Alright. Anyway, I feel like it's no surprise what's going to be at the bottom here, but, gotta do what you gotta do. And I gotta admit that getting to this album was another reason that it was hard to get through this whole ranking, because it was just like, God, I know I gotta review this album, and I gotta say something about it, so try to get it off my chest. Anyway, we have 11 studio albums we have to get through today, and at number 11 at the bottom, of course, is Saint Anger. I know I'm definitely not the only one that feels this way. That's a pretty popular opinion. For anyone to really defend Saint Anger and put it higher in a ranking, like, would be something special, I think. Like, they would have had to have had a special place for this album in their heart somewhere. But anyway, get to my notes and maybe try to explain a little bit around it. And I know I probably should state this, I might state it again in other videos, but the, like, star rankings or the number rankings, yes, they're arbitrary. They don't really represent, like, whether something is really good or not. Like, when I do something like 1 to 5 out of 5, it just kind of helps me put together, like, the ranking, if that makes sense, because some albums can be so close together. So if I have the number, like, to space them apart, it kind of helps, and kind of allows me to evaluate my own emotional value on these things. So yeah, the numbers are kind of stupid. They don't really matter, but it does help me organize things, and maybe some people will get something out of it. You can gauge how much I like stuff. So, Saint Anger, 2 out of 5 stars. While this album may sit at the bottom, quite obviously, for myself and many others, I do have a bit to defend about it before tearing it apart. I don't truly hate it, and I think it's one of the absolute worst albums ever. I enjoy hearing the guitars drop down in tuning this low, especially at this point in their discography where the keys they'd been writing in had mostly been recycled quite repetitively by them. Invisible Kid is in drop A, for fuck's sake. I'd have never thought they'd go that low. Another note on the guitar end that I like is the weird touches that Kirk adds in place of solos for his no guitar solo rule on here, which I do hate that he made that his goal on this album, but what he does achieve actually does add unique textures that makes most of the songs pop. All around, just little things you wouldn't think that he'd do. I'll get into the shit talk in a sec, but regardless of the mix, I've never minded the opening 3 tracks. I feel they open the record well and achieve the best version of this aesthetic that they were going for. It's just that they maybe blow their load, no pun intended, maybe pun intended, too quick, by front-loading the 3 most listenable tracks. They also achieve a weird genre blend of like groove, thrash, sludge / doom, and nu metal on here. That's kind of like unprecedented and maybe hasn't like really been achieved before or again, for better or worse. I don't leave that to you. Anyways, you can't defend much beyond all that. Yes, it's nice and heavy all the way through if that's your thing, but the mix is so trash and it just plays for so long that the relentless heaviness of it just makes it one hell of a slog. Like a one-dimensional one at that. What were they thinking with the drums and vocals too? Like, we all know about the trash can tone snare drum, but they also get like super digitally compressed, like you just downloaded them off of LimeWire or something. It's so bad and loud, like, and James really just kills it in a bad way with his like sour notes that he hits. Just some odd choices, and yeah, I know it's kind of just a strange place for them in their career and all, and like, and they were just kind of getting some shit out and venting more or less through this record. But goddamn, like if they would have just polished up a couple things on here, it probably wouldn't be as notoriously hated as it is. It's just a mess. It's just a complete mess, and it's too long. Like goddamn. Now, moving to number 10. Going backwards, one record in their career. Maybe this one's also not surprising. I've seen some people put this one higher than Load, but at number 10 we got Reload with 3 out of 5 stars, going up 1 star ranking here. Contrary to what many have said, including myself in the past, I do not believe that this album is truly awful. It's really a fine listen. I also love the overall sound of the mix from Load, and this is basically the same thing, so the sonic textures that I enjoyed are all there. Nothing on here truly sounds off-putting or poorly executed. Now I know it seems as though I'm going to completely defend Reload, but I cannot. There are certainly some nitpicking points to be made from me on this album. Like, for starters, I've never felt that this album was truly necessary. Load already ran too long with about as much space as they could cram on a CD, and the need to technically make it a sort of double album with this one is just not felt by me. Mainly because they really don't bring much that's new or interesting to the table. Most of the songs sound like spiritual cousins to Load songs, but like lesser versions. I just don't find this to be a strong lot of songs overall. The few best ones on here could easily be swapped with the few weaker ones on the previous release, and I wouldn't even bat an eye to this album like never have been released. The flow of the track order is so all over the place too. Like, they gave no attention to anything about the song-to-song cohesion and just picked like the best opener and closer for it. There are a few more moments that break them from that sluggish, mid-tempo groove that they were so stuck in, which is cool for them, but there's just plenty of it here. Kirk's solos are also becoming pretty predictable most of the time, and Lars's tracks are too. They really both lack much of an edge that they once had. There are still cool solos here and there, though, and the riffage is always badass. There just aren't as strong or memorable of melodies. In fact, sometimes the vocal lines feel like forced in there, like he's cramming too many words. Overall, not bad. It just doesn't do much for me as an album. Definitely great songs on it still, some very underrated ones. It's definitely an underrated album, but just not a necessary one, in my opinion. There's definitely good stuff on it. It's just like, kind of like Saint Anger, just like a big mess. If they would have just touched over a few things, it maybe could be maybe could be a little more solid in my eyes, but hey, that's opinion. Like I said, I've seen people put Reload above Load, which you will see where that lies for me in a minute. But for now, we're at number 9, and we're going to move forward a little bit past Saint Anger to Death Magnetic at 3.5 out of 5 stars. Going up half a star for this one. It's the mother of all comeback albums. I don't mean comeback as in they had a reunion after a long hiatus either. Metallica was an active band between Saint Anger and this album. By comeback, I mean that right after Saint Anger, a lot of people thought Metallica had lost their fire, that they had fallen off. I'm sure after so much harsh criticism, they felt they had something to prove with this record. Like, whatever the next release with the newfound bassist Rob Trujillo would end up being anyway. And prove it they did. I can personally recall when this album was being released and the hype surrounding their return to form, so to speak. In almost every aspect, it is like a modern successor to Injustice for All, except that we can thankfully hear every note clear as day from their new bassist. Otherwise, the mix and songwriting approach are almost identical to it. There is maybe the tiniest smidgen of influences from their 4 albums between that and this, such as the down-tuned guitars, the effects on them, some of the groove added amongst their sheer brutality, and an attention to writing catchy hooks with the vocals. It may sound like that's still a lot of similar details, but they are scant throughout compared to the pure thrash and traditional heavy metal, more exemplified on here. Like I said, aside from audible bass, the mix is almost spot on to Justice. To my detriment, though. I mean, the drums are just way too damn loud compared to the rest of the mix. The lead guitar and vocals almost seem like they're with it, but they bury the rhythms and the bass at times, like, completely. These are intense songs, too, so you kind of hear the drums taking that on more than anything, you know? I feel this is Lars' best drumming, though, you know, at least out of their newer era. I love how complex and winding they also get in every song here, too, trying to bring in as many progressive elements as they can, kind of like on Injustice for All. But yeah, it's just got some great songs, some great twists and turns to their career, you know, and very memorable tracks, too. I feel like the only reason it's this low in my ranking is predominantly because of the mix. It's just not as enjoyable to listen to, very overblown, and certain things just aren't balanced the way that I like them to be. And, yeah, the other thing was that it also has, like, probably my least favorite Metallica song, like, period, which is Suicide and Redemption, the instrumental on here. And I hate to even say it because it's got riffs. Like, there's, like, pretty much all the riffs in the song slap, and they're all pretty good, and the solo in it is amazing. It's just that none of the parts, like, fit together to me. Like, they all just kind of, like, go nowhere, and they have, like, jarring key changes and stuff. Along with a couple other moments of tracks on this album. There's just some jarring moments that kind of, like... And I love twists and turns and progressive shit in music, but there's some stuff on here where it's like I'm left scratching my head, like that like chord or that rhythm change, it just didn't feel, it felt forced or something. Anyway, I love Death Magnetic, like, don't get me wrong, like, it's a great album. It has, like, one big stinker for me, and the rest are, like, solid as hell, and I mean, some of these songs are some of the best that they've ever done, like, no doubt. Alright. On to number 8. Hopefully this one isn't, like, too much of a shocker. Hope I don't disappoint the band themselves with this one, because I do appreciate it a lot. But at number 8, I have their new record, 72 Seasons. At 4 out of 5 stars, half star above Death Magnetic. Metallica really know how to make an album that never lets up. There's literally one moment in the very last song, Inamorata, that you could even say is a soft part. Granted, yes, a few tracks are mid-tempo groovers, not unlike those on Hardwired, and they aren't all full-speed thrashers like the opener title track or lead single Lux Eterna. Nonetheless, though, every song is intense and visceral to a degree, even if it's just a brooding, menacing intensity. It's just overall one of the heaviest front-to-back that they have in their catalog, and for that to be the case over 40 years after the inception of the band is really a feat in itself. They literally have nothing to prove at this point, yet they all continuously fire on all four cylinders, like, for over 70 minutes on this motherfucker. For a band that takes all kinds of heat throughout the years, they always come back swinging. This is, in fact, an evolution from the previous two, believe it or not, too. They have a lot of the creativity in the riffs from the last one mixed with the typical thrash style, giving any fans who complained that it didn't go hard enough for them on the last one. James seems to have found a new tone in his voice or something, too. Not sure if it's in the production on here making me think that, though. The mixing on the album does sound affected at times, like, even if it's just, like, them doubling up the vocals or something to smooth it out. It makes it a little muffled at some times, or buried, or jarbled. Like, I can't really understand what's going on or what's fully being said on first listen. I mean, I can if I go back, but, like, when you're listening to it, it just kind of gets buried at times because of whatever's being done to the vocals on here. As impressive as they are, the agedness you can hear in his voice could add to that too. He doesn't hold back on his range, techniques, and rawness, though. It may not be as clean as Hardwired's vocals, but they're, like, undeniably strong and new sounding, like fresh. Another tiny mixing nitpick is that when a solo kicks in, it just, like, buries the backing behind it completely. Great solos, perhaps even a tiny bit more wild and creative this time, but there's a lack of, like, blending them into the mix, really. Otherwise, the playing and production is solid, really a tour de force for Metallica, especially at this point. Like, I didn't expect this album to go as hard as it did. I kind of was hoping that it wouldn't, in a way, because some of the things I like about Metallica is that they're a metal band that isn't afraid to really, like, twist it up every once in a while. You know, they add ballads and stuff, which there is none of on here, as I said. It's just pure fucking metal. But yeah, it is very impressive. And there's good ass songs on here. I don't know that I would put any of them above some songs on Death Magnetic still, which is kind of weird, but overall I enjoy this album more as a listening experience than that. Anyway, oh yeah, I didn't even mention too on that one, I gotta give it up to Rob Trujillo on the new album, because, like, goddamn, the bass on that thing, it's just, it's great. It feels good. Alright, this one might take some people by surprise, especially people who know me and know how much I was in love with this back in the day. But at number 7, got a controversial take here, hot take. Number 7 is Kill 'Em All, their debut album, originally titled Metal Up Your Ass. I got it at 4 out of 5 stars. We're not going to be moving in the star ranking here anytime soon, just going to let you know. It was very much like that for Metallica for me, which kind of is going to go into why Kill 'Em All is kind of sitting at the bottom of the 4-star bunch here, with 72 seasons anyway. It's such a raw and visceral album, as one should expect for an early 80s heavy metal record. What a powerful statement to help usher in the thrash metal genre, though. Like most of the early thrash bands' first albums, there is heavy influences of new wave of British heavy metal and speed metal felt throughout. probably more so than the typical elements of thrash from this point forward. Aside from metal, I also feel that this shows the crossover of hardcore and punk's influence in distinguishing the genre from the rest of metal's subgenres. Some, if not most of the songs are like fusions of Iron Maiden, Merciful Fate, Judas Priest, and Diamond Head, with like the Misfits and Black Flag, the Clash and Dead Boys. The heavy amount of direct influences that doesn't detract from my enjoyment or really what I think makes these songs stand strong on their own. Metallica properly experiments with fusing the different sounds they like and end up with what is uniquely them in the end. Of course, they would only tighten up what makes the Metallica sound like themselves from here on. You know, like, it's always awesome to hear their useful. It's always awesome to hear their youthful, hedonistic, booze-fueled energy, though. Never again in their catalog do James's vocals reach the heights and extremes like on Kill 'Em All. I do think his voice gets tighter and finds more and more control later on, but he had an impressive range and guttural voice to match it for so early on in his life and for heavy metal in general. For some reason, I remember hating the mix of the drums on this album when I was younger, but I feel dumb now because after coming back, I think they're fine. Again, Lars would develop a little further in time, but the sound is nice and powerful. I can't complain. He shows promise with his speed and fills on here, too. I do love the craziness of the lead work. Some of the scale choices sound off sometimes, but it's all mostly ridiculous and in your face. And most of the solos were written by Dave Mustaine, which I feel like those are mostly the ones that like slap pretty hard on here. There's just a couple spots like where, I don't know, it just kind of seems like he's winging it with the key on it, and it just doesn't really fit. And it's always nuts, like playing super fast and crazy. Just sometimes I don't feel like the solos like complement the songs as well. But there's definitely bangers on here. It's just a little bit of a sloppy album compared to the rest of them. Like, I love Kill 'Em All. I can get down with every track on here, no doubt. I mean, most of these songs are like the first songs I ever learned how to play on guitar. You know, it's crazy how big of a deal that album really is. It's just, you know, doesn't stack up song production and maturity-wise like to the rest of the albums that they have, because they really just have a lot of good albums. Alrighty. And that was... So, at number 6, probably going to be another controversial one. Maybe not, because I feel like a lot of people can hear me out on what I have to say about, like, maybe the production on this, perhaps. But, number 6 we have And Justice for All, first album with new bassist Jason Newsted. We got this also at 4 out of 5 stars. Yet again, another pretty visceral album, front to back. I think there is a slight case to be made for one being a ballad and breaking up the constant heaviness a bit. It only barely does so, though, as it has a building heaviness throughout, similar to Welcome Home Sanitarium, where it finalizes in pure thrash. So I don't really consider it a true ballad. While this still may be an onslaught that rarely lets up, I still don't mind being beaten over the head with each riff after riff on here. It's all so well constructed, perhaps even more complex and well executed in that sense than before. I strongly feel there's a lot of progressive metal in each of these tracks too, and Metallica has always flirted with prog elements before this, especially being that a lot of those bands are among their early influences. Still, the winding structures and complex rhythms, they often shift time signatures on here and add bars and meters here and there. That all makes this point stick out more clearly to me. One famous flaw of this album in the mix, though, obviously the decision to cut the bass down to an almost inaudible level will never rub me and a lot of people in the right way. And I don't believe it does anything at all to benefit the mix. Like, at all. Nothing at all. The guitar tones, while even more awesome and crushing than before, seem balanced strangely to me. Like the drums, the lead vocals, and solos bury the rest a bit, which is kind of a problem that happens on later albums, I've found out. The drums do have a unique and awesome, powerful sound, though. Lars' playing may even be at his peak level of proficiency and as well. Sorry, I meant to phrase that differently. Lars' playing may even be at his peak level of proficiency as well. Anybody that thinks they can easily play every Metallica song on drums better turn to this album and give it a try, because it's going to give you some challenges. Kirk's solos are also the best here, too. His skills aren't much different from Master of Puppets, but they seem written more thoughtfully and carefully. Finally, I want to note that Hetfield's voice is closer to how he will soon sound on the Black Album and on, with his delivery having more conviction, albeit it still has that, like, military command-esque bark to it that he would kind of lose later and then get back again in more recent times. Let's see, moving on, try to get through the rest of these here. At number 5, I didn't know where this album was going to rank for me, because when I was younger, and I feel like a lot of people feel this too, especially if you were in the 90s around when this came out, this album was just like a letdown. And looking back, I really enjoy this album a lot, so I just was wondering where I was going to put it. But at number 5, we got Load, the follow-up to the Black Album, at 4 out of 5 stars. It's a solid follow-up to the success of the Black Album, though there isn't much of a chance of surpassing it, no matter how many twists they throw in on here. We have also truly reached the Metallica of the 1990s by this one, and I think their adoption of more grunge and alt-rock styles suited them as well, especially being the leaders of thrash metal coming into a decade where heavy metal was said to have been dying in popularity. I think they find a nice balance between writing genuinely catchy songs and making them with that heavy Metallica stamp on them. We get 2 of their biggest surprises in their discography on here, too. The Thin Lizzy / Southern rock inspired Hero of the Day and the country-tinged power ballad Mama Said, both while highly controversial to most die-hard fans, and 2 of the strongest songs melodically in their catalog, to be honest. They both bring a much different vibe that they had never ever displayed before. It adds a weird melancholic nostalgia to the track list for me. I do feel that this album is too long, though. The fact that it has a sequel of Leftovers doesn't help either. There's 2 or 3 songs I would have either completely taken off or swapped with a few tracks from Reload. I get that they had just, like, had this big plethora of material sitting around that they were proud of and wanted a way to get it all out to us in a cohesive project, which I feel they mostly did. It's just that the majority of the tracks have a similar mid-tempo brooding about them. It gets sort of repetitive and monotonous by the midway point until it's saved by Wasting My Hate, which is a pretty thrashy song. Other than that, I really love the mix on here. Everything sounds on point. The flow isn't terrible. It just kind of drags a tiny bit from the middle to the end. Definitely the most creative they've ever gotten with their arrangements and thinking outside their own box, or painting themselves outside of their corner, so to speak. It is a very creative album, and you can just see how they got this whole big bank of music going in the 90s. Alrighty. Hopefully that didn't surprise too many people, putting Load up that high, but I really enjoy all the songs on there. Even the ones I was talking about taking out, like I don't want them to be like completely scrapped. Like there's good songs. It's just like the pacing of them. Like they put too many of those mid-tempo ones like right next to each other, and they kind of sound the same. Some of them do. Some of them are in different keys from one another, which kind of helps, but a lot of them have that similar vibe, which is something that I'm also going to get into on the next one here at number 4. The previous album to their newest album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, at 4 out of 5 stars. This album was really important for me. I remember I was living in California when this album came out, and it was, Metallica is a California band, so this album was all over the radio over there. It was just cool. It was a cool time to be a Metallica fan when Hardwired was coming out. Anyway, now this album definitely delivers through and through. The only criticisms I can even give are going to be the slightest of nitpicks. For Hardwired is everything you'd want and expect out of them at this point. Some may say it's maybe too predictable at times, but they up the ante and add enough nuances throughout that I can't get bored. Most notably, the most progression from the previous album to here, with almost a decade in between, mind you, is felt in James's vocals. Since Saint Anger, it had felt like he'd straight up lost a lot of his higher register that you can hear on every album before that, at least some point in some song. With Death Magnetic being the powerful comeback that it was musically, it also sounded that he was pushing a bit to reach some notes, especially after either a more subdued or barked delivery that had happened. I don't quite understand what happened to him, but he is on point in every aspect on here. It's unbelievable. Like, he found the perfect control to blend his old and new school approach, making it overall more interesting in the end. The mix is untouchable on this album, too. This is probably their most perfectly mixed album, period, in my opinion. Like, maybe too perfect. Granted, by that, in turn, it sort of means a lot of the raw sound of early Metallica albums is lost. It makes up for it by being a palatable breath of fresh air from the last 2 albums' mixes, though. The few gripes one could have is that Lars doesn't go hard enough or metal enough to make these tracks, more in the vein of, like, what people expect from a heavy metal band. And that Kirk never employs anything radically different in his solos, or that the more mid-tempo tracks, similar to like Load and Reload, in the back half, they kind of slog on a bit. But in its defense, I still think Lars gets even more creative than ever with what he adds. Kirk still rips the living hell out of each and every solo on here. And the songs I mentioned that are brooding kind of have enough twists and are very thoughtful and focused songwriting ideas to keep me on the edge of my seat throughout this whole album. It's just such a good, catchy album. I feel like they put the best hooks like ever on all these songs. Like, just very well thought out and crafted. Like, I can't thank them enough for coming back with a great album like Hardwired. Like, wow. Alright, so at number 3, the top 3, you guys know what's left if you're paying attention. And these top 3 shouldn't be a surprise really to anybody. I feel like most of these albums will rank up in most people's lists, just probably depending on how you grew up with each of them and shit, but it is what it is. Like I always say, interested to hear your lists below. Let me know in the comments. Let me know how you like my reviews. Any tips, any help would be appreciated, Don't like the negativity, but constructive criticism. Alright, so number 3. We got Metallica, the self-titled, aka Black Album. Out of 4.5 out of 5 stars, we're moving up a half a star finally. They have, how many was that? That's like, didn't really count. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got 5 4-star albums for them. Alright, let's get into it. Being that this is one of the... already messing up. Being that this is one of 2 of the first albums I ever owned, I'm blinded by a slight nostalgia bias. Something that can probably be said for all of Metallica's discography in some form, but this one album of theirs has that going for it for me. With that out of the way, I want to get to the nitty-gritty of it, though. Even though Enter Sandman is as solid of a banger opening hit track as it gets, the fact that a clean guitar is the first thing we hear on this album is enough to signify a change occurring in the overall dynamic of the band. And yes, Ride and Master have clean and acoustic openings too, but those feel more like intro pieces, like separate from any returning part of the song structure to come, like little classical opening things, like overtures. Whereas Enter Sandman's opening is literally the main riff throughout, and if that makes sense at all to justify my claim, as like I said, to signify them like having a change in the times. Anyway, yes, it opens very strong for the entire first half of the record, and I feel the pacing isn't awful or anything. In fact, it's just fine. My nitpick is that some of the ordering of the back half gets a little repetitive, as much as I still love all of those songs. This is broken up by Nothing Else Matters and My Friend of Misery, though, making it a still pretty interesting flow for them. The mixer overall is nice and powerful, but the drums and vocals are like way too loud and powerful again. They pretty much overtake the entire sound when they're going, which is most of the time. They could have been dialed back to meet the bass and guitars just a bit. The latter two, I think, are in the mix like pretty perfectly. Couldn't change them. I suppose this is what gives this record its characteristic sound, though. Musically, the songwriting is stronger than ever. The riffs have more groove. The solos more wah, but more attention to detail in their construction. This is also where James's voice begins to keep going down in range, and Lars' style also becoming less intense and stripped down in approach too. It's kind of like, you know, he says that he was trying to not be stock, but at the end of the day, we all know some of these beats are pretty stock. They're just kind of like not interesting, you know what I mean? Like, he does some interesting things, but he just kind of like, he sounds lazy on some of the parts. I don't know. That's just my take on it. I'm also not a drummer, so I know a lot of drummers have different viewpoints on that whole thing right there, and Lars as a drummer in general. But we're gonna move on to my number 2. This was hard for me because back when I first got into heavy metal big time and consider myself a thrash aficionado, I was in the impression that this album was their best, and it was really hard to break me from that. But anyone who knows me knows that I'm talking about Ride the Lightning at number 2. For a long time, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, no doubt. We got it at 4.5 out of 5 stars again. So it's not quite perfect for me, but we'll get into that and why the other one beats it a little bit. They follow up their debut stronger than most and make improvements in all aspects of what was presented on Kill 'Em All. There's less songs total in favor of longer track lengths. I dig this approach, though, as it really reminds of the length of older rock albums of the 70s. There isn't a moment on here where I would say fat needs to be trimmed off either. Each song feels perfectly structured. I'm not huge on the way the drums are mixed, especially the cymbals. The playing is slightly better and more interesting, but it overall was of better quality on the previous album to me. James's vocals aren't quite as high in range as before too, but you can hear him honing in closer to the tone that he's most known for. Still similar in delivery to the debut, but this time with more control and attention to detail and how his dynamics can be utilized. All of the guitar work is a step up. All of the solos are well thought out and yet still just as insane. They begin introducing more dual guitar harmonies too, which is cool. Maybe more so total than on any of their other albums going forward. The riffs are all just so crushing and way more complex than Kill 'Em All's. There's so much more interesting chromatic and modal changes going on in each song. And then the tones are just bone chilling too, whatever they're doing with their guitar amps and pedals and stuff. Especially killer tones on Cliff's bass. It's slightly buried in the mix at times compared to the debut or Master of Puppets, but you can hear the amazing playing well enough still. His use of bass wah sounds so cool and unique on here too, like on Call of Cthulhu and stuff. So strange sounding. For a still pretty straightforward metal album, the pacing is well done. A very satisfying flow of keys, moods, and tempos throughout. And every moment puts me on the edge of my seat, accepting the glorious onslaught that is this whole album, Ride the Lightning. It's just such a classic, it is pretty much a masterpiece. The only things holding it back are perhaps the slight production things, and maybe just the strength of some of the songs in general, as we will get to on number 1, which we all know is, of course, the only album left, Master of Puppets. The Master. At number 5, not number 5, it's 5 out of 5 stars, a perfect album, in my opinion anyway. That's arbitrary and very subjective to anyone, obviously, but in my opinion, Metallica does have a perfect album, and it is this bad boy right here. This is definitely one of the best produced albums in heavy metal, especially an album this visceral front to back, or back to the front, no pun intended. Everything just sounds so on point, definitely one of their most brutal offerings, though it still has enough interesting moments where they dabble with other elements, and it doesn't let up in its intensity for long. There is no real ballad like Fade to Black on Ride the Lightning, unless you want to count Welcome Home Sanitarium, but that one goes a little too hard too frequently for me to be considered a real ballad or even power ballad. That is still an amazing song on here, though, as it showcases more of a flirtation of a soft/loud dynamic, which would only become more of a staple later on, especially in their longer, more epic songs. Every song on here has always been extremely enjoyable and very fond for me. I can't help but headbang to every damn second. Really, most of their albums do that for me, though. For it being such a heavy album, it's still very well thought out in its flow, too. Another example of them doing a great job of keeping different tempos and keys well organized. Obviously, it has one of the best opener and closer pairs ever with Battery and Damage Inc. Melodically, the songs still have a bit of the chromatic and mode-shifting tendencies as before. It seems there is much more thought-out classical arrangements in most of the songs somewhere, though. Probably evidence of Cliff Burton's musical prowess beginning to reach more prominence in their sound. Rest in peace, very short-lived, because this was his final album. Something that is very greatly missed if you ever get elements of it at all later. I mean, there's a few tracks in all of the, preceding albums, but not much. It's all very brutal. And, I mean, they get the songwriting a little tighter, and they definitely hone in, I feel more of a knowledge of their craft and all, but, there isn't the complexity that Cliff brought to the table. All of the playing from each member sounds like they are at their peak potential and skill level, though, no doubt, only to mature and refine it from different perspectives in their world later on. They all are so on point and really could... I don't know how they could really do better than this, how many metal bands could. I mean, obviously there is still good metal albums out here, maybe ones I like more than Master of Puppets and stuff, We'll maybe get there one day. But this album is pretty damn perfect. I like the flow of it a lot. I like the sound of it a lot. Can't go wrong with a single song on it. And most of the songs on here are amongst my favorite heavy metal songs, period. And songs in general. But anyway, without further ado, that was it. That was my ranking of the Metallica studio albums. I did leave out Garage Inc. That is a covers album. A very lengthy one at that, and it's also kind of a hodgepodge between different projects as well, right? Like, Garage Days and stuff like that. Didn't include any of the EPs or Lulu or anything like that, S&M. They just don't fit into the criteria of one of their pure studio albums for me. Maybe they do for some people, that's just not me. Obviously, S&M is a live album, but still. Alright, well, I've talked enough about them today. I hope you guys enjoyed this a lot. It was really fun going back for them, even though it was kind of arduous for me at times and a little cathartic, just because of the circumstances. But I'm glad to be back at it. I'm going to keep these coming at you, and hopefully, get to some new experiences in the future. Like I said, got a lot of bands to get through that I have a list of, that are like some of my favorite bands and I'm familiar with enough to talk at length about. But I do want to use this as a platform for me to kind of discover music that I haven't really gotten the chance to listen to too deeply to yet. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I want your recommendations. I want your lists and everything down below. I don't really care what you think about how I look, but I do care about what you think about my reviews and what I have to say about the music. Hopefully you guys see that this is in good fun. It's all completely arbitrary, and if you just happen to stumble across my music and you want to hear where some of my influences come from and are interested in my tastes, or you just need a little help getting your toes into some of these bands, I just hope I can be that help for you. So without further ado, everyone have a great day. Thanks for listening and hearing me out on this Metallica ranking. You'll have a wonderful day. Peace and love.